Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to cut and sew a jacket with basic sleeve and a fringe at the hemline. This is actually a two-piece design, but in today's video, I'm going to be focusing on how to sew the jacket. So if this sounds like something you're interested in, then keep watching and remember to subscribe to the channel and like this video. So right here, I have 3 yards of Ankara fabric. The nature of this fabric is that it has two different prints in one. So I'm going to be using one of the prints for the jacket and then the other one for the inner part of the dress. Also, I have here 1 yard of this. I've actually forgotten the name of this, but I'm going to be leaving it in the description box in case you want to get one for yourself. So when you open up the fabric, this is what it looks like. So like I said earlier, I'm going to be using one of the prints for the jacket and then the other one for the inner part. So right now I've divided the two prints and then I've placed the fabric on fold like so. The good thing about today's video is that there will be no pattern drafting. I'm going to be drafting everything directly on the fabric. So the fabric is on fold and the length of it is dependent on how long you want it to be. So I'm cutting for both the front and the back pattern at the same time. So right now I'm just going to arrange it like so. I'm going to be placing the back pattern on the front pattern. So the one that is on top is the back pattern, while the one below is the front pattern. And I'm going to be placing the back pattern 2 inches away from the front pattern, as you see me do. So I'm just going to be using my measuring tape to make sure that the back pattern is 2 inches away from the front pattern. So after you're sure about it, you're going to pin it down like so. By the time you're done pinning it, you're going to be drawing a straight line from the edge of the fabric. This is just to ensure that we're working on a straight line. And I'm going to be using this line as the top line. So from the top line, I'm going to be marking my chest line, which is 8 inches away from the top line. So after marking it out, I'm going to connect it like so. And then when you're done with this, I'm going to be marking half of my shoulder measurement. Take note that I'm marking half of the shoulder measurement on the back pattern, not on the front pattern. That means I'm marking it 2 inches away from the front. So after marking it out on the top line, I'm also going to mark it on the chest line. And I'll connect it, drawing a straight line. And then from this new line, I'll go down by 1 inch. Why? I'm going to mark 3 inches on the back pattern and I'll connect it. Then I'm going to be dividing this line by 2 and I'll go in by 0.5 inch. So I'm going to be using a French curve to connect it like so. While for the back pattern, I'm going to be connecting it from the line that we drew earlier. When you're done with this, the next thing to do now is to mark quarter of your bust measurement. I'm going to be adding half an inch for ease and then half an inch for sewing allowance. Take note, we are marking this measurement away from that 2 inches point that we left in front. So after this, I'm going to be marking my waistline, that is 16.5 inch away from the top line. So after marking it out, I'm going to draw it out. So on the waistline, I'm going to be marking quarter of my waist measurements from that 2 inches point all the way to the other end. You can add 1 inch for ease or 2 inch, just depends on how wide you want it to be. And then I'm also going to be adding half an inch for the sewing allowance. You can add more than half an inch for sewing allowance. And then from this point also, I'm going to be marking my hip line from the top line all the way down. So after marking the hip line, on that hip line, I'm going to be marking quarter of my hip measurements plus half an inch sewing allowance. You can add half an inch is as well if you want. Just depends on what you prefer, on how free you want it to be. And then while on the hemline, I'm going to be minusing 1 inch from whatever we have on the hip measurements. I'm going to be minusing 1 inch from it, and then I'll mark it on that hemline. And then after marking it, I'm going to use a straight rule to connect all points, and that will be all for this pattern. All I have to do now is to cut it out. Note that if you want yours to be exactly as the style inspiration, you're going to be adding more ease to yours. You're going to make it shorter, and you're not going to pencil it. When you're done cutting, I'm just going to be marking out the neckline for this dress. So for the back pattern, I'm going in by 1 inch, and then I'll use a French cuff to connect it like so. While for the front pattern, I'm going in by 3 inch, and I'll use a French cuff to connect it. So first we are going to be cutting for the back pattern. By the time you're done cutting out the neckline for the back, you're going to be removing the back from the front, and you're going to cut out the neckline for the front. I'm just going to be tracing out the neckline we drew earlier using a French cuff. So at this point, also remember to notch the 2 inches allowance that we left in front, and also go in by 0.5 inch at the armhole. So by the time you're done with this, the next thing to do now is to separate the front pattern. I'm going to be opening it up like so. So from this point, the next thing to do is to take this to the pressing iron, and I'm going to be folding in that 2 inches allowance that we left in front. I've also gone ahead to add interfacing from the 2 inches points like so. So by the time you're done with this is what it should look like. The next thing I'm going to be doing now is to shape the neckline for the front. If you notice, after folding in that 2 inches allowance, the neckline is not aligning to the 2 inches point. So I'm just going to be shaping it. And this is what we have. So I'm also going to do the same thing for the other side of the front pattern as well. So after doing this, the next thing to do now is to place this on the lining. I'm going to be cutting exactly what I have here on the front. So this is what it looks like by the time you're done. I'll also go ahead to cut for the lining for the back as well. So after cutting the lining for the front, I'm going to be going in by 1.5 inch at this point. So I'll be using my ruler to mark 1.5 inch from the neckline all the way to the hemline, and I'll connect it. So after marking it out, I'm going to be using my scissors to cut it off like so. So by the time you're done cutting, I'm going to be separating the lining from each other, and then I'll be placing one piece of the lining with the other piece of the fabric like so. So right now I'm just going to pin it all the way down. And then by the time you're done pinning it, you're going to take it to the sewing machine, and I'm going to be sewing by 0.5 inch by 0.25 inch sewing allowance. So by the time I'm done sewing and I turn it to the right side, this is what it looks like. I've also done the same thing for the other side of the fabric as well, and this is what we have. So now the next thing to do now is to open up this point by 2 inches wide, nothing more than 2 inches please. And then from the hemline, I'm going to be cutting off the lining by 1 inch. So just pay attention to what I'm doing here. After cutting it off by 1 inch and you open it up, this is what it looks like. So now I'm going to be joining the lining with the fabric like so. So I will join it using 0.25 inch sewing allowance. And by the time you turn it to the right side, this is what it should look like. So with this, we have a very clean finish at the inner part of the jacket. So now we are just going to be closing that opening that we created earlier. So I'll just turn it to the wrong side and I'll be closing up that hole that is there. So when you're done sewing it and then you turn it to the right side, this is what it should look like. So I'm going to do the same thing for the other side of the front pattern as well. And then the next thing to do now is to turn it to the wrong side, and I'm going to be joining the lining to the fabric at the neckline. So I'll be using 0.5 inch sewing allowance. Then after you're done doing this, you're going to be notching it. So after notching, you're going to turn it to the right side, and this is what it should look like. So you can use a gum stay to press it down very well, or you can even understitch it. It just depends on what you prefer. So now I'm also going to turn it to the wrong side, and I'm going to be joining it at the side seam using 0.25 inch sewing allowance. So I've done the same thing for the other side of the front pattern as well. So now I'm going to be focusing on the back pattern. So for the back pattern, I've gone ahead to cut for the lining. And then now I'm just going to open it up like so, and this is what I have. By the time you open it up, you're going to be placing the lining on it like so, and you're going to be joining it at the neckline using 0.5 inch sewing allowance. While for the hemline, I'm going to be going in by 1 inch for the lining, and then I'll be joining the fabric to the lining like so using 0.25 inch sewing allowance. So by the time you're done sewing and you turn it to the right side, this is what it should look like. So after sewing the neckline, you're going to notch it. Remember to notch it, and then you're going to be joining the fabric to the lining at the side seam using 0.25 inch sewing allowance. So when you turn it to the right side, this is what it should look like. So now at this point, I'm going to be joining the front pattern to the back pattern at the side seam. I'm also going to be joining it at the shoulder line. So to join at the shoulder line, I'm going to be opening it up like so, and I'm going to be joining lining to lining, fabric to fabric using 0.5 inch sewing allowance. While at the side seam, I'm going to be using 0.25 inch sewing allowance. and then by the time you're done with that and you turn it to the right side, this is what it should look like. And at this point, we are almost done with this dress. So the next thing to do now is to just attach this attach this to the hemline. So I'm just going to be folding the edge inward, and I'll be attaching it, sewing directly on it. So by the time you're done sewing on it, this is what it should look like. So all we have to do now is to attach the basic sleeve to this jacket. So in order to do that, I've placed my fabric on fold, and from the top line I'm going to be drawing a straight line. From the edge of the fabric, I'm going to be drawing a straight line. I'll be using that as the top line. So from the top line, I'm going to be dividing my bust measurements by 12, and I'll add 1.5 inch to whatever I get. My bust measurements divided by 12 plus 1.5 is 4.25. So I'm adding 0.5 inch to that, which is 4.75. So I'm marking approximately 5 inches from the top line. So after marking it out, I'm going to draw a straight line. So from the straight line, I'm going to be marking my chest line measurement on that point. So my chest line measurement is 8 inches. So that is from my shoulder to my chest line. So from that point, I'm going to be connecting it to the top line like so. And then I'll divide this line by 2, and I'll go out by 0.5 inch. And then I'm going to be marking it like so, connecting it to the other end. While for the length of the sleeve, I'm using 25 inches. So from that 25 inches, I'm going to be measuring my wrist measurements, and what I have is 7 inches. Because I want it to be free, I'm using 8 inches. So I'm going to be dividing 8 inches by 2. That is 4 plus 1 inch for sewing allowance, that is 5. So I'm marking 5 inches on that point. So I'm just going to be connecting it like so, and I'll cut it off, and that will be all for the basic sleeve pattern. I'm going to be cutting 2 pieces of this, and I'm also going to be cutting the lining as well. So I'm going to be placing the lining on the fabric like so, and I'm going to be sewing at the hemline and at the side seam. All we have to do now is to just attach this to the sleeve, and that will be all for today's video. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thank you.